Welcome to Insult My Intelligence with me, Tim Dowling. This is the podcast where I dare to ask smart people dumb questions about some of the things I've never really understood, openly and without embarrassment. Well, with embarrassment, and then we edit the embarrassment out because otherwise it would take too long. This is the first episode of Insult My Intelligence, and the first topic we're going to explore is dogs. The question we're asking today is, how smart are dogs really? And by that I mean, how smart is my dog? And by that, I think I mean, how stupid is my dog? Also, how smart are dogs compared to other animals? And how smart are some of the smartest dogs in the world, of which I'm pretty certain my dog is not one. To get these answers, I spoke to 3 of the leading dog cognition experts in the world, and I also put my dog Nellie through some intelligence testing. We'll have those results later. The first chat I had was with husband and wife dog research team and authors of The Genius of Dogs, Vanessa Woods and Brian Hare. As befits a cohabiting pair of canine cognition experts, they have a very, very smart dog.
Well, we have a really smart dog who is a retired service dog. He's from Canine Companions for Independence. So he used to know like 50 commands. He could do your laundry.
No, he still knows them.
But he doesn't do them because he's retired.
No, he's so smart
that he doesn't do anything anymore.
He's like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is a lot of work.
I also spoke to Dr. Adam Miklosi, a Hungarian researcher who set up something called the Family Dog Project.
I never had a dog and I still not have one. So for me, it was really like jumping into a dark room without any preparations.
Miklosi has a claim to be one of the first to study dog cognition back in the 1990s.
By the way, that was not my decision, especially not at the beginning. I was sort of told to do that because before that, I was actually working on fish behavior, specifically on anti-predator fish behaviors. But at some point, my professor at that time decided that we should change topic and research interests. And so one of his suggestions was to study dogs. And then I was sort of thinking a little bit, and I thought it would be quite challenging to study them. So I decided to be a dog researcher just basically overnight.
Brian Hare's introduction to the study of canine cognition was, in its own way, just as accidental.
I was an undergraduate and I was working with great apes, and we were studying how great apes struggle to understand gestural communication of humans. And so my advisor, undergraduate advisor who was leading the research, Mike Tomasello, said, I think this is something unique to humans. Only humans can understand gestures this way. And I said, stupidly, as a 19-year-old who didn't know better to not, tell a preeminent expert, I said, well, I think my dog does that. And that's how it all started. And he thought that was a really exciting suggestion. And it ended up that dogs are really good at this thing that great apes struggle with, as smart as great apes are. And it launched a whole area of research and my own career in a direction I never would have anticipated. And it was all because of my pet dog growing up.
What the chimps were struggling with was pointing. When they were shown hidden objects by humans pointing at them, they didn't understand what the gestures stood for. Hare went home to his dog Oreo and conducted a similar test in his parents' garage. He hid treats under one of 2 cups and pointed. Oreo clearly understood what the gesture meant without being trained, and so did a lot of other dogs. Not my dog, though. My dog, Nellie, like the chimps, doesn't really get it. Vanessa Woods and Brian Hare wrote a book called The Genius of Dogs. I wanted them to explain what they mean by dog genius.
If you take a big picture and you say, what is success in life and which species have been, really successful, especially since humans have spread across the planet, dogs really stand out. There's one estimate is there are over 1 billion dogs on the planet now. And meanwhile, wolves, which is the species they evolved from, are endangered everywhere they're found. So then the question is, well, how did dogs become so successful? And what is it about their evolution that allowed them to do this? And whatever that is, that must be their genius. And connecting the origin of my research in dogs and that question, we think it is that it's dogs' unusual ability to understand us, to read our intentions, what we want, what we don't want, that gave them a leg up. And in addition to their total endless friendliness towards us, I think that's what allowed them to win.
Adam McCloskey has been studying family dogs for decades, and some of his research has yielded interesting results on the emotional capability of dogs. One of the things that struck me also was that a lot of people want to read into dogs a lot of different emotions, and a lot of people think, you see this on YouTube and Twitter all the time. You see people with dogs looking guilty, and my understanding is that dogs don't really feel guilt. They're just listening to, they're just being caught, and they're listening to your tone, and they're sort of cowering because they can see that you're angry.
Animals have emotions. So this is not a question whether they have or don't have emotion. Is sort of a process that takes place in brains and minds, and the more complicated the mind is, the more complicated emotions you might expect. That's one important thing. So based on this, dogs can have emotion, which we describe, and that's important that we describe as emotion, that dogs might also have something similar, like being happy, being sad, feeling fear, and such aspects. Now, the emotions that you have mentioned, guilt, these are very complicated one. But there's an easier emotion, easier to understand, for example, jealousy. Jealousy is also a complicated emotion because it is not regarded as a basic emotion, but jealousy is about, or somebody feels jealousy, I put it this way, when you think that some of your important social relationships is threatened by somebody else. So then you feel jealous, and then you show it in certain behavior strategies. You try to separate those others and get the attention to you again. So it actually involves quite a lot of strategical thinking, how to solve this issue problem while you are feeling this jealous emotion. Now, guilt is even a more complicated one. We did some experiments. We couldn't really find very strong evidence for that emotion. And we also suggest that it's probably more something that is sort of, in put it short, fear from punishment in some ways that makes them showing this behavior. Now, however, what we also found, that this is interesting, that dogs who are showing something that we might call guilt, they don't get so much punishment. So actually, actually, it's a good strategy for a dog to act as if they have guilt. Whether they have guilt or not, we will probably never find out, but this may be a pessimistic comment now. Let's see.
Today I caught our dog just this morning eating the food out of the cat's bowl, and I got very, very close before she discovered me, and the result looked a lot like guilt. She jumped off the table very, very quickly. But I can see that I have sort of trained that, obviously, if she looks guilty enough, you're right, I don't punish her. But you did a study on jealousy, and dogs do get jealous, don't they?
Yes, they do get jealous. So this is what I mentioned. This is a typical emotion. But just like in humans, not everybody is always jealous, because we humans are also different. So this is also part of a personality issue. Some people are more jealous or more likely to be jealous than others. And this is also the case in dogs. So some dogs, for some reason, don't really care about their social relationships so much compared to others. And also that is a problem, because obviously we have to do all these experiments under controlled conditions, and you can't just tell the dog, okay, now show jealousy, right, because I have 10 minutes to record your behavior. So it's really complicated to put those dogs who actually are reported to be jealous by their owners into a situation where there's a chance that at least they, show some evidence or some behavior evidence for jealousy.
How do you go about that?
So what we basically did was, the dog came to our lab. We knew, at least we hoped, that it will be jealous. So he was also coming with another dog from the household. And so we asked the owner, let's interact with the other dog. And we observed the focus dog, whether it showed jealous behavior, which we had defined as getting the attention of the owner, trying to separate the interacting parties, and many other aspects of behavior. So that the dog showed these behavior features more often if there was another dog present than when the owner was doing some other stuff. And this was as one indication for us. I mean, you could come up with other ideas, but it was another indication for us that yes, jealousy exists in dogs, and this is a general emotional state of them.
So dogs have an ability to emotionally manipulate humans to get what they want. But how does their overall intelligence compare to other animals like primates and dolphins?
When I was telling you sort of that dogs have a genius, that's sort of at the species level. But of course, within the species, there's a lot of individual variability. And I get asked all the time, sort of like, is a dog smarter than a chimpanzee, et cetera? And I always say that's a really hard question because it's like asking me, is a screwdriver a better tool than a hammer? Well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? If it's a dolphin versus a chimpanzee, chimpanzees aren't going to do very good catching a fish, and a dolphin can't get fruit out of a tree. So it really just depends. And so with dogs, that it seems like their sort of toolkit that makes them successful is the social ability.
Obviously, each species is very different. So when you're looking from a biological perspective, you should assume that each species is more or less prepared for living in that particular environment in which they are found. So wolves are prepared for living in the forest, or prepared for being social hunters, prepared for maintaining a huge territory and all that. Now, dogs are prepared during this domestication history for living with humans. So they have skills, cognitive skills, that help them to actually get into interaction with humans, communicate with humans, cooperate with humans, and all that things. So whether this is something more complicated or more complex or less complex than what wolves have, it's very difficult to decide, because as you said, it's difficult to quantify them. So actually, these comparative experiments are always tricky, because people really like to get some results, like in sport, who is better than the other. Now, this is what I really try to avoid. This is not a competition between species.
Okay, so no one wants to say if dogs are smarter than monkeys or pigeons, but there does seem to be a way of answering the other question. How smart is my dog? All three of our guests today are involved in a website called Cognition that allows dog owners to put their dog through 20 or so simple games and log the results. The site will then give you a profile of your dog and show you how they performed against other dogs. So I had to put Nelly through some tests. Vanessa, you're co-founders of something called Cognition. Can you explain to me what Cognition is?
Sure. So the research that we do at the Duke Canine Cognition Center is it's basically asking dogs questions, and they're super simple. And we thought they were really fun. And we kept having all these trainers and other dog people saying, well, because you can really understand a lot about how a dog's mind works just by asking them questions in the way you'd ask like a child that can't talk yet. And so there's just these choice paradigms that really sort of see what kind of part of their minds that they're using, where they lean in terms of different cognitive abilities. And so we developed this website where people can go on and play these same kind of games with their dogs and find out about how their dogs' minds work.
We signed on yesterday with our dog.
What's your dog's name?
She's called Nelly.
How did Nelly do?
Nelly did. It was a mixed bag, I would say. It's not a question of how well she did in dog school. It's more like she got a letter that basically said, "We have many highly competitive, candidates. You won't be coming this autumn." We began with the sort of we just did the assessment, and we started with the yawn test, which I don't think either of us understood that test. But I did my bit right anyway. And she didn't. She didn't do anything. But I think one of the problems we had with Nelly was she is, if anything, way too engaged with the whole thing. I mean, the second test, which she was off the charts it was just the one where you maintain eye contact.
Eye contact, right.
And she'll do that for, 90 seconds was fine. She'd do a day. She'd do a whole day.
Wow.
But that means that when I'm trying to do the yawn thing or any other thing, she is actually just still staring at me. Like, yeah, exactly.
So the yawn and the eye contact test, they were both measures of empathy. So actually very few dogs yawn in response to your yawning. There was one researcher. The idea is that basically empathy is you feeling what somebody else feels. So when you yawn and when you read about yawning and when somebody you care about yawns, you just feel this I'm just starting to feel like I want to yawn right now. And the idea is that you have this kind of emotional transference. And so if Nellie were to yawn while you were yawning, it's kind of she would be experiencing the same thing. But I think we found when we analyzed the data that very few dogs actually did that. It was like it was really rare. But the eye contact is so interesting because what happens with parents and their infants, you remember having babies, like they cry all the time, they don't bring anything to the party. They're just crying, feed them all the time. It's just like work, 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 work. And so, and they're so helpless. Like you put them down for like a minute and they almost like roll off something and try and kill themselves. So it's like they need to elicit this constant care from you. And the way they do that is with eye contact. And what happens is babies stare at their parents. It kind of increases the oxytocin. It's called the hug hormone. It does a lot of things. But one of the things it does is that it's responsible for feelings of bonding and attachment. So when your baby stares at you, your oxytocin goes up, and then you stare at your baby, and then your baby oxytocin goes up, and it creates this beautiful loop that sort of elicits caregiving and attention when babies can't really do much except for cry. And so what dogs have done is they've actually hijacked this loop. And so I'm not sure if you've ever seen Nellie just staring at you and you're like, what do you want? You need to go to the bathroom? You want something to eat? And she's just sitting there staring at you. And what she's doing is that she's trying to start that oxytocin loop, because they found that in dogs the same thing happens. So their oxytocin goes up, your oxytocin goes up, and they found all this really cool sort of like things that happen. Owners whose dogs stare at them for longer report having like a stronger relationship. And it's incredible that a completely different species has hijacked this mechanism that was essentially for our infants.
That was about as well as she did, I'm afraid, all day. The next thing we tried was the thing with the Post-it notes, and about a bag and a half of dog treats. We tried to get her to go to the left and the right based on just to explain this to listeners, the idea is that there are 3 Post-it notes on the ground, so you have a left and a right channel essentially set up between you and the dog, and you start by putting treats either side, and the dog, unless your dog is a moron, your dog will go down the side where the treat is. But when you put, and I'm not saying my dog is a moron, but
we wouldn't say that about Nellie. No. I didn't met her, but it cannot be true.
But when she eventually put 2 treats down at once, so there's a left and a right channel option, and you point to one, and the idea is to see whether the dog will take cues from you. And Nellie unfortunately went left 12 times running.
She has a side bias. That's valid. That's completely valid.
It doesn't mean she didn't get it, though.
Yeah. She's not really paying attention to where
pointing with the feet didn't help. Nothing.
Nothing. Oh.
Nothing helped. And she always, once she figured out that she could always just snaffle up the right one after she'd eaten the left one.
No, you're supposed to take it up to.
No. That test you don't.
Oh,
no wrong answers. No wrong answers.
I started taking them up about halfway through just because we were going to run out otherwise. What else did we do? We did the thing where you then sort of hold the dog back, and this actually had sort of interesting mixed results, I think, because you say no or whatever you use for no, leave it, one of those things, and then you let the dog go, and it's a question of how long the dog will wait before it just goes ahead, and I think the first time she just completely ignored me, and then the second time, maybe it was something to do with the way I said it. I just put a little more behind it. She waited, and she would have waited all day, I think, until we let her. She wasn't going to move.
She needed to know you were serious.
Yeah, maybe, and maybe I just there's a way of using my voice that I didn't use the first time. I guess one of the questions we had was whether if we kept doing this, the dog would get better at it, and if training. If they can improve their score, does that mean that this is about training as opposed to some kind of inherent intelligence?
Yeah, so we're really most interested in the first measures and their spontaneous performance. And for sure,
Right.
you can shape response and all these things with different experience. But that's why, it may have felt like it took forever, but it actually is. And y'all really invested. I'm impressed at how far you guys got. It's really impressive. The A plus to you guys. But um, it's actually very few measurements from a scientific perspective. It's 4 or 5 times in the key test trials, and so the idea is let's look at the very first attempts at this and see what their spontaneous reaction is. And so yes, if you kept going, you could shape and see different reactions for sure.
I mean, obviously, different breeds probably have different levels of intelligence, although they're so specialized that it's bred into them. That's what they're meant to be.
Yeah, so what we found with Cognition, we had thousands of people play these games, and one of the things we found is we did the games you described. For instance, you described empathy and the communication games. The cunning game too. So 3 of the 5.
Yeah.
There were a couple more: memory, and then there's inferential reasoning. So it ends up that the individual variability within each of those games is independent of one another. So that's a complex way maybe to say if you're a dog and you're good at English, you're good at writing English prose, but it doesn't predict you're good at math. And
Right.
if you're good at math problems, it doesn't predict that you're good at English. And so if you were kind of remarkable on the empathy games, it doesn't mean that you were good at the communication games or memory, etc. And so what we found was that different breeds really have different profiles. Different individual dogs have different profiles across these different measures. And so it's really hard to say that one breed is the smart breed.
Yeah.
So for instance, we have some data that Staffy Terriers, pit bulls were really best at memory games. Springer Spaniels were best at the communication games. I could keep going. So I mean, it wasn't that Border Collies nowhere to be seen in the top 5. German Shepherd's not there. Labrador Retriever's not there. So it sort of defies expectations once you collect the data and you realize these things vary independently across different dogs. But the one that I can say that's easy to remember is on that game where you asked the dog not to take the food. We found that small dogs were the most cunning and the most disobedient. So larger dogs were actually the most obedient and generally would just sit there and not take the food when you told them not to. So they would remember the command, not do it, and they would not do it. They were more likely not to do it in all the different conditions, whether your back was turned or not. Small dogs were specifically quicker to go get the food when your back was turned or your eyes were closed. So they are definitely, using their size against us, I guess.
Is it true that it's the kind of thing that people always say? I certainly always say that mutts are more intelligent than purebred dogs. I mean, everybody would say a mutt is smarter than a Labrador, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much individual variability that it's actually really difficult to say. And it depends on what measure we're talking about. I actually think that, we could probably cluster different mutts and it would depend on what their origin and what their makeup was, where they would fall. But it actually ends up, I know that's a really disappointing answer because I'm saying it's complicated.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can just say, mutts are smarter, purebreds are smarter. It really depends on the measure and what we're talking about and who you're comparing them to.
Okay, so I have Nellie's report here from Cognition. It's at Cognition they break the dogs down into categories such as ace, expert, Renaissance dog, Einstein. Nellie's category is socialite. It's actually it's huge. It's like a 16-page report. But I think I've had a look, and I think if we just stick to the good news, it won't take very long to get through. The good news is empathy. Nellie's empathy scores were off the charts. This is even more special because initial results suggest that small dogs like Nellie tend to be more individualistic than large dogs. So Nellie certainly stands out from the small dog crowd. And she's also very good at bonding, and she's quite impulsive, and that's pretty much the end of the good news. Summing up, it says, although Nellie is not as adept at independent problem-solving skills as other dogs, you got that right, don't jump to any conclusions about her intelligence. Nellie relies on a very specific strategy, using you and other humans in her pack to get what she wants. Yeah, it's pretty unattractive, isn't it? Clearly, Nellie is no genius. She isn't the best representative for the dog species. I asked Adam McCloskey about some of the smartest dogs he's ever come across.
We had this single dog, Whiskey, which was a Norwegian border collie, by the way, and the Whiskey seemed to be able to actually have some knowledge on categories, but the owner of the Whiskey, who was a journalist and had no idea from dog training, nothing, he simply played with this dog. So this Whiskey actually is a dog who knows about 100 object names, and the object names are like, big ball, small ball, red ball, long rope, short rope, and all that. So this means that this gave us the opportunity to test whether Whiskey has also some knowledge about categories. Our question was basically that during these totally spontaneous interactions, where there was no intention that Whiskey actually learns categories or the concept of categories in terms of toys, whether he could actually do that. So we introduced some new toys that belong to the same category. So we had balls and ropes and frisbees and so on. And it turned actually out that yes, even if when the Whiskey has seen a new frisbee for the first time, among a new rope and a new ball, then he could actually get that, or she could actually get that object if he asked for a rope or a ball. So basically, he this was the first time in his life. So he could recognize the similarity of that, red frisbee to frisbees in general. And that's very interesting because this suggests, obviously it's one dog in one series of experiments, that it's really possible that even in animal mind, without relying on language and without massive laboratory training, the mind of an animal can come up with a representation that is sort of equivalent to what we call a category.
Also, somebody bought Whiskey over 50 toys. That's a lot. My dog has one toy at a time. It destroys the toy. We give it a new toy. 50 toys is...
Well, actually, 50 is not... So at that time it was 50. Now Whiskey is close to 100, and we don't have the I think the world champion was Chaser. It is an American border collie, and he knew about more than 1,000 objects. So we are not going for the world record, by the way. We are rather going for more.
Well, I've heard of these dogs. They come up again and again. Chaser and Rico.
Yes, they knew.
Name.
Yes, they knew more toys. More toys. For us, it's more interesting to having more dogs at the same time. So now our special dog population consists of about 20 dogs, and they know about 50 or 20, 50, 70. But actually, just a very recent, we had this social media event challenging dogs live on learning object labels, and it turned out that they can learn I think about 6 objects per week. So if somebody has a lot of time, then you can try to have a new world record, but well, let's see.
So how smart is my dog? Ultimately, she's some way off genius. She'll never be a Rico or a Chaser, able to learn hundreds or even thousands of words. But they probably wouldn't be able to stare unnervingly into my eyes for minutes at a stretch. On a general IQ scale, we can't compare dogs to other animals, because when we talk about dog intelligence, we're not talking about maths or spatial awareness or, sorry Nellie, the ability to follow simple commands. We're talking about emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manipulate human emotions, which is the secret to their survival. This is their special genius. They're better at this than any animal. Their only real rivals are human babies. Oh, and one final thing. I don't know whether this means that my dog is smart or dumb. It's just a question. Why is my dog friends with a fox?
Your dog is friends with a fox?
Yeah, that's
What?
not normal, is it?
No, it's wonderful. Very
Wow.
friendly. Wait, so what happens? She just goes out. There's a fox
So
that comes at nighttime and she plays with them?
behind our garden, there's basically a sort of parking lot, and there's a long lane that runs down the side of our garden. If you let the dog out the front at night, or if you just open the front door, the dog runs out the front door and goes around the corner where there is invariably a fox waiting, and she chases the fox in circles around the parking lot until she gets tired, and then she comes back, and by the time she's halfway back up the lane, the fox has come back after her, coming back for more. And so
Oh
she
my
turns
gosh, you
back.
need to video that. That is amazing. But so the interesting thing is that, domestication doesn't necessarily happen with one species. And there's all this evidence, especially in the English foxes, that they're becoming domesticated. They're super friendly. They're in all I think I saw like a picture of a fox at like an ATM, like just standing in line. And so they have these like different, so, the process of domestication is happening in all these animals. In America is probably coyotes, but they have these different colorations. They're much less afraid of people. They're really becoming populous in urban areas. So maybe Nellie just thinks that she's just, a dog that needs a little work.
Now the fox waits under the streetlight for Nelly to come out. You just see her sitting there. I think they're adolescent. I don't know. I
Yeah,
think
that would make the most sense if they were adolescent. But it is true what Vanessa is saying, that there is data from the UK saying that more urban foxes are attracted and more likely to approach and interact and with humans and human artifacts and their pets. And so one prediction is you're going to start seeing morphological traits start changing in the city foxes compared to rural living foxes. But this, of course, gives any epidemiologist or anybody who studies zoonosis, heart palpitations. That we've got all these friendly foxes that aren't vaccinated interacting with our dogs.
Yeah.
So.
Well, during the pandemic, during the first wave of lockdown, when nobody was really supposed to be outside, if you went out to the shops or something, you just see foxes walking around like commuters. It's like, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but you're not supposed to be here either. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Insult My Intelligence. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. And follow the show on Twitter at InsultMyIntel. You can also email us at insultmyintelshow@gmail.com. Next week, we're learning about Planet 9. And if, like me, you think that refers to Pluto, then we both have a lot to learn.
All that I can do with the calculations that we run is predict an orbit and a mass of something. So I can't tell you if it's a 5 Earth mass burrito. Maybe it's a 5 Earth mass. I don't know, beer glass. I don't know. Like, it could be anything. It could be, as long as it's 5 Earth masses, it can really be anything. But then you come to the question of what things in the universe get stamped out at 5 Earth masses, and the typical thing is planets.